On the edge of San Francisco Bay, where fog rolls in thick and the water stays cold year-round, stands one of the most recognizable prisons in American history, San Quentin State Prison. From the outside, it looks almost calm, low stone walls, guard towers facing open water, the distant sound of seagulls instead of sirens. But behind those walls is a place that has carried violence, punishment, reform, and controversy for more than 170 years. San Quentin is not just California's oldest prison, it is the most infamous. For decades, it housed the largest death row population in the United States. It has executed more inmates than any prison west of the Mississippi, and it has held some of the most notorious names in American crime history. But San Quentin is more than its reputation. It is a prison that never stopped operating. Even as laws changed, public opinion shifted, and the death penalty itself came under scrutiny. While other facilities modernized or closed, San Quentin remained a living artifact of how America once punished, and how it still does. San Quentin was established in 1852, before California was fully organized as a state correctional system. There was no blueprint, no long-term plan, just one goal: containment. The prison was built quickly, cheaply, and with little regard for human comfort. Early inmates lived on ships anchored in the bay before the prison walls were even finished. From the very beginning, San Quentin was a place of improvisation, overcrowding, and strict control. That foundation never fully changed. As decades passed, San Quentin expanded, not outward, but inward. More cells, more tears, more people stacked into aging concrete and steel. Unlike modern prisons designed around surveillance and movement control, San Quentin grew layer by layer, reacting to crime, population growth, and politics as they happened. That history still shapes how the prison functions today, for much of its modern history. San Quentin was defined by one thing: death row. At its peak, more than 700 condemned inmates were housed inside the prison, the largest death row population in the Western Hemisphere. Men sentenced to die lived just a few hundred yards from San Francisco Bay. Separated from freedom by thick concrete walls and time, executions were carried out on site. First by hanging, later by the gas chamber, eventually by lethal injection. Even inmates not sentenced to death lived under the constant presence of it, the knowledge that executions happened here, that people were led from cells to their final moments inside the same complex, shaped the psychological atmosphere of the prison. San Quentin was not just a place of incarceration. It was a place where endings happened. Unlike newer facilities, San Quentin was never designed for modern incarceration. Cells are small, ventilation is inconsistent, movement patterns are narrow and congested. Many housing units were built for a population far smaller than what eventually occupied them. This creates a unique pressure inside the prison. Tension does not come only from inmates. It comes from the building itself. Narrow walkways, blind corners, crowded tiers, noise that never fully disappears. Correctional officers often describe San Quentin as unpredictable, not because of constant violence, but because of how quickly conditions can change. One moment calm, the next chaotic. San Quentin is a prison of extremes. It is home to some of the harshest sentences in the country and some of the most progressive prison programs in California inside the same walls. You can find death row cells, college-level education programs, restorative justice groups, maximum security housing, creative writing workshops, long-term solitary confinement media, training programs. This contradiction confuses many people. How can a prison associated with executions also promote rehabilitation? The answer lies in San Quentin's unusual position in American corrections. It is both a relic of the past and a testing ground for the future. This documentary is not about glorifying crime. It is not about defending punishment. It is about understanding what happens inside a prison that never left the national spotlight. In the sections ahead, we will explore daily life inside San Quentin, the reality of death row housing, the impact of long-term incarceration, the role of correctional officers, the effect on families and communities, what happens when inmates leave, and when they never do. Some of the individuals discussed will be fictionalized for storytelling clarity. But the environment, procedures, and conditions are grounded in documented reality. Why San Quentin still matters. San Quentin is often called a symbol. To some, it represents justice. To others, failure. To many, something in between. But one thing is undeniable. San Quentin has shaped how America thinks about punishment more than almost any other prison. And as debates continue over incarceration, rehabilitation, and the death penalty, San Quentin remains standing, unchanged in many ways, and deeply changed in others. This is not just a story of a prison. It is the story of how systems endure long after the reasons for them are questioned. And this is where that story begins. San Quentin State Prison is not just a correctional facility. It is a living archive of California's criminal justice history. Opened in 1852, San Quentin predates California's modern prison system. Its court reforms, and even many of the cities that now surround it, at the time of its construction, California was still shaping its identity as a state. Gold rush fortunes were rising and falling overnight, and crime followed just as quickly. San Quentin was built to impose order on chaos. The prison sits on a narrow strip of land along San Francisco Bay, just north of the Golden Gate from the outside. It looks almost surreal. Gray stone walls standing against blue water and open sky. On clear days, inmates can see sailboats drifting past, commuters crossing the bay, and the distant skyline of San Francisco. Freedom is visible, but completely unreachable. That contrast has defined San Quentin for more than a century, unlike modern facilities designed with modular units and controlled expansion. San Quentin was built with permanence in mind. Its original structures were constructed from thick stone and reinforced concrete, intended to withstand riots, escapes, and time itself over the decades. Additions were layered onto the original design: new cell blocks, execution chambers, medical wings. An administrative office is creating a prison that feels more like a fortress that grew organically, rather than a single planned institution. Some of the prison's cell blocks are over 100 years old. Cells were built narrow and tall, with solid steel bars, minimal ventilation, and almost no natural light. Unlike newer prisons, many areas of San Quentin lack modern climate control. In the summer, heat lingers. In the winter, cold creeps through the walls. Time never updated San Quentin. It simply stacked new systems on top of old ones. San Quentin became synonymous with death row not by accident, but by policy. For decades, California centralized executions at San Quentin. Men sentenced to death from across the state were transferred here, turning the prison into the most recognizable execution site in American history at its peak. San Quentin housed the largest death row population in the Western Hemisphere. Inmates on death row were not only isolated from the general population, they were separated from time itself. Appeals stretched for decades. Some inmates spent 30 to 40 years waiting for outcomes that never came. Execution methods changed. Over time, hangings in the early years, the gas chamber beginning in the 1930s, lethal injection in. The modern era. Each change reflected shifting public attitudes, but the waiting never changed. For many condemned inmates, death row became life without resolution. San Quentin functions like a small city sealed behind walls. Inside are medical facilities, kitchens serving thousands of meals, daily workshops, and maintenance crews, educational programs religious serve. ICE's administrative courts and legal offices, thousands of correctional officers, nurses, teachers. Chaplains and staff pass through its gates every week. The prison never truly sleeps. Even at night, lights remain on, counts continue, movement is tracked, the system keeps breathing, and inside that system live men serving sentences ranging from a few years to life without parole. San Quentin is not a single-purpose prison, while famous for death row. It also houses individuals serving life sentences, inmates involved in high-profile cases, prisoners transferred due to security needs, individuals participating in rehabilitation programs. Some inmates arrive young and grow old inside its walls. Others arrive already burdened by decades behind bars elsewhere. What unites them is not just crime but permanence. San Quentin is where California sends people it does not expect to see return to society anytime soon. Few prisons carry psychological pressure. like San Quentin. Inmates are constantly reminded where they are, the gas chamber visible during escorted movement, the execution building standing silent, but present stories passed down. From older inmates' names etched into prison lore, even inmates not on death row feel its presence. The knowledge that executions once occurred regularly within these walls shapes the environment. It affects how inmates perceive time, justice, and their own futures. San Quentin doesn't just confine bodies, it preserves memory. San Quentin has drawn global attention for generations, journalists, filmmakers, lawyers, activists, and scholars have all passed through its gates. It has been referenced in books, documentaries, music, and court rulings. It is studied as a symbol of capital punishment, a test case for rehabilitation, a warning about overcrowding, a mirror of America. A's evolving justice system, few prisons are both operational facilities and cultural landmarks. San Quentin is both. By the time an inmate arrives at San Quentin, the journey through the justice system is often already long and complex, but entering this prison marks a turning point. Because once inside San Quentin, time moves differently, and in the next section, we will step inside the daily reality of life behind these historic walls where routine replaces freedom, where violence is always possible but not always visible, and where survival often depends on understanding the rules no one writes down. San Quentin is not a mystery to the people who live inside it. It is routine, it is noise, it is proximity. Unlike isolated supermax prisons, San Quentin operates in constant motion. Men live close to one another, sometimes closer than they want to be. Cells are stacked, voices overlap, footsteps echo day and night. Privacy, in the traditional sense, does not exist. For many incarcerated individuals, the first shock is not fear. It is density. San Quentin houses thousands of people within a relatively compact footprint in some units. Inmates sleep in cells originally designed for one person but later adapted to hold two in others. Open dormitories stretch across large rooms lined with bunk beds, separated by little more than arm's length. Every movement requires awareness. Where you walk, who you pass, when you speak, when you stay silent. Inside these walls, personal space is a luxury if you can afford. A typical day at San Quentin begins early. Let's come on before sunrise. Counts are conducted multiple times a day. Meals arrive on schedule, delivered to cells, or eaten in designated dining areas depending on housing assignment. There is work to be done. Some inmates hold jobs inside the prison kitchen: duty, laundry, maintenance, clerical tasks. Others attend educational programs, vocational training, or substance abuse counseling when space and eligibility allow. Movement is tightly controlled but frequent. Lines form for chow, lines form for work, lines form for medical appointments, lines form for yard access. Unlike prisons designed around isolation, San Quentin's structure forces interaction. Even silence is shared. The yard is where San Quentin's social structure becomes most visible. Here, alliances form along familiar lines race geography. Shared history, these divisions are not always formal, but they are understood. People know where they belong and where they don't. The yard is not constant chaos, as popular media often suggests. Most days, it functions quietly. Men walk laps, some exercise, others sit in groups, talking softly or watching the movement around them. But tension is always present. Disputes don't need to be loud to be serious. A look held too long, a word misunderstood, a boundary crossed accidentally. Correctional officers monitor continuously, trained to read body language as much as behavior. When violence occurs, it is often brief and quickly contained, but its impact lingers long after. San Quentin is uniquely known for housing California's death row. Even inmates not sentenced do. Death are aware of it. The presence is psychological, constant, unspoken. Death row inmates are housed separately under different restrictions, but their existence shapes the atmosphere of the prison as a whole. Some have lived there for decades, navigating a system of appeals and delays that stretches time into something abstract for others. Inside San Quentin, death row serves as a reminder not of punishment alone, but of finality. It changes how people think about time, A sentence becomes more than numbers on paper. It becomes a life measured in routines. San Quentin is loud, metal doors slam, radios crackle. Announcements echo through aging loudspeakers, voices carry through tiers and corridors at night. The noise doesn't disappear, it just changes, coughing, murmured conversations, footsteps during. Late counts. The distant clank of gates opening and closing. Sleep comes in fragments. For some, this constant sound becomes a source of stress. For others, it becomes background, something the mind learns to filter out over time. Adaptation is survival. Living inside San Quentin requires emotional recalibration. Anger is costly. Impulsiveness is dangerous. Isolation is rare, but loneliness is common. People learn to regulate themselves not because they want to, but because the environment demands it. Reputation matters. Consistency matters. Overreaction draws attention, and attention often leads to consequences. Many inmates describe learning a different version of patience. Not optimism, not hope, just endurance. Days blur together. Weeks are marked by small events, yard days, visits, mail delivery. Program schedules, and slowly, the outside world begins to feel distant. Correctional officers at San Quentin operate in a challenging environment. They manage movement, enforce rules, de-escalate conflict, and maintain order in one of the most historically significant prisons in the United States. Most interactions are brief and procedural. Instructions are given. Compliance is expected. Personal conversations are rare. The relationship between staff and inmates is shaped by necessity, not familiarity. Trust exists, but it is limited and conditional. Everyone understands the boundaries. San Quentin is not frozen in time over the years. Programs have expanded, educational access has increased, rehabilitation efforts have grown. Even within the constraints of an aging facility, yet the core reality remains unchanged. This is a prison built to contain large numbers of people for long periods of time, and living here requires adaptation not just physically, but mentally. By the time an inmate has settled into life at San Quentin, something subtle begins to happen. The noise becomes familiar. The routines become automatic. The presence of others becomes normal. But normalization comes with a cost. Because once the environment feels normal, it starts to shape behavior and identity in ways that are difficult to notice until much later. And in the next section, we examine what that long-term exposure does to the mind. By the time an inmate has settled into San Quentin's daily rhythm, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Time moves differently here. Not slower, not faster, just heavier. Every day begins the same way long before sunrise. Metal doors rattle, keys jangle, boots echo. Against concrete floors worn smooth by more than a century of footsteps at San Quentin. Routine is not designed for comfort. It is designed for control. Lights snap on its scheduled intervals. Morning count begins. Inmates stand by their bunks, eyes forward, waiting to be seen and recorded. For those housed on death row, the routine is even more rigid. Movement is limited. Schedules are strict, every action standing. Sitting, speaking exists within clearly defined boundaries. Breakfast arrives early. Trays slide through slots or are passed cell to cell depending on housing unit. The food is basic, functional, and repetitive. Nutrition matters less than predictability. Because predictability keeps order, and order keeps San Quentin running. Life inside San Quentin unfolds vertically. Cells are stacked in tiers, rows of steel and concrete rising several levels. High, from the ground floor, voices drift downward. From above, footsteps echo like distant thunder. Privacy does not exist. Every cough, every argument, every whispered conversation, it all travels. In older housing units, sound moves freely. A shout from one end of the tier can ripple across the entire block. Inmates learn quickly that words carry consequences, so they choose them carefully. Or not at all. Some men speak constantly, filling the silence, pushing against isolation. Others withdraw, conserving energy, avoiding attention. Both are survival strategies in San Quentin. Movement is controlled with precision. An inmate does not simply go somewhere. He is moved. Movement requires clearance. Clearance requires staffing. Staffing depends on security levels, housing classification, and daily conditions when movement happens. It happens in stages. Doors unlock and sequence officers give clear commands, inmates comply immediate. Eli, any hesitation is noted. This is not personal. It is procedural. San Quentin has operated long. Enough to know that small lapses can become serious incidents, especially in a facility where violent offenders, long-term inmates, individuals with nothing left to lose all exist in close proximity. For general population inmates, yard time is one of the few breaks in the day. For death row inmates, it is something else entirely. Yard spaces are smaller, movement is more restricted. Interaction is limited. Still, the yard matters. It is where muscles stretch, where sunlight hits skin, where the outside world feels briefly closer. Some inmates walk slow circles, others exercise in silence. A few talk quietly, cautiously. Everyone watches, not out of fear, out of awareness, because in a place like San Quentin, awareness is currency. Over time, inmates begin to change, not suddenly, but gradually they adapt their thinking, their expectations, their emotional range. Psychologists call this institutional adjustment inside San Quentin. It looks like emotional restraint, reduced reactions to stress, heightened alertness to routine changes, detachment from long-term thinking. Many inmates stop thinking in years. They think in meals, counts, yard rotations. The future becomes abstract. The present becomes everything for death row inmates. This adaptation carries extra weight because the future is uncertain and often finite. Officially, communication is regulated. Unofficially, human connection finds cracks in the system. Letters, brief conversations during movement, short exchanges across tiers, nothing dramatic, nothing reckless. Just enough to remind someone they are not alone. For many men inside San Quentin, those moments matter more than they admit, because isolation doesn't just punish the body, it reshapes the mind. Correctional officers at San Quentin operate under constant pressure. They walk the same tiers every day, hear the same sounds, respond to the same tensions. Most are not hardened. They are trained. Trained to observe, to de-escalate, to maintain control without escalating force. Veteran officers often say the same thing. The building tells you how the day is going to go. A louder tier. Unusual silence. A shift in inmate behavior. San Quentin communicates through patterns, and experienced staff learn to read them. By the end of each day, the routine resets. Dinner, final count, lights dim. Inmates return to their cells. Officers finish reports. The tier settles, but the weight remains. Because tomorrow will be the same, and the day after that, and the one after that. By the time an inmate reaches death row at San Quentin, the legal battle may be ongoing, but daily life becomes painfully predictable. San Quentin's death row is not a single block. It is a system of units, primarily East Block and West Block, each designed decades ago for control rather than comfort. The architecture reflects another era of incarceration. Narrow tiers, steel bars instead of solid doors, and cells stacked vertically, one above the other. Most death row cells measure roughly 4 feet wide by 8 feet deep. Inside, a narrow bunk fixed to the wall, a thin mattress, a small metal shelf, a toilet, and sink combination. You need minimal personal property. There is no privacy. There is no silence. Unlike supermax prisons built around isolation, San Quentin's death row is loud constantly. Voices echo between tiers, metal doors slam, radios crackle. Footsteps travel through the concrete like vibrations for some inmates. The noise is overwhelming for others. It is the only reminder that they are not completely alone. A typical day on death row follows a rigid structure. Morning begins early. Lights come on, counts are conducted, breakfast trays are passed through the bars, meals are eaten alone, standing or sitting on the bunk, often in silence. There is no communal dining. No shared tables, no casual interaction. After breakfast, the waiting begins. Some inmates raid, some write letters, some pace their cells for hours, others stare at the walls, lost in thought. Movement is limited and tightly controlled. Showers are scheduled. Recreation, when permitted, takes place in small, enclosed yards or cages, often alone or with minimal contact. Time does not move forward here. It circles, what separates death row from every other housing. You need is not just security, it's uncertainty. Some inmates arrive knowing their execution date could be years away. Others remain on death row for decades, their cases moving slowly through appeals, reversals, and retrials. This creates a psychological paradox. Life feels frozen, but the future is never fully defined. Every legal update can change everything, or change nothing at all. Mail from attorneys becomes lifelines. Court rulings are read and reread. Small phrases carry enormous weight. For many, the hardest part is not fear but waiting without resolution. Psychologists who have studied long-term death row incarceration describe common patterns: hypervigilance, emotional suppression, difficulty forming trust cycles of hope followed by deep resignation. Some inmates maintain strict routines to stay grounded, reading at the same hour daily, writing letters at night, exercising in small spaces, memorizing legal documents. Others withdraw completely. San Quentin staff are trained to watch for changes: sudden silence, agitation, refusal of meals, or withdrawal from routines. Mental health teams conduct regular evaluations, but access is limited by security requirements and staffing constraints. This is not a place built for rehabilitation. It is a place built for containment. Despite its reputation, San Quentin is not devoid of humanity. Some inmates tutor others through cell bars. Some create art, writing, or music using minimal supplies. A few participate in carefully supervised programs when permitted. These moments do not erase the reality of death row, but they complicate it, because even in the most controlled environments, people still seek meaning, still seek identity, still seek purpose. Correctional officers assigned to death row face unique challenges. They work in close proximity to individuals convicted of the most serious crimes, many of whom will never leave the facility. Officers must maintain professional distance while managing constant exposure to tension, emotion, and unpredictability. Veteran staff often say, "You don't get used to death row, you just learn how to carry it." Burnout is common. Transfers are frequent. Some officers stay for decades, others leave after a few years. The job demands vigilance, restraint, and emotional control. Mistakes are not an option. By the end of this section, one thing becomes clear: San Quentin's death row is not defined by executions alone. It is defined by time, waiting, and psychological endurance. It is a place where punishment is not just a sentence, it is a daily condition. And for those who live and work there, every day unfolds under the same question: how do you survive a future that never fully arrives? By the time an individual reaches death row at San Quentin, the trial is over. The verdict has been delivered. The sentence has been imposed. But what follows is not an ending. It is waiting. At San Quentin, death row is not defined by executions. It is defined by time that stretches endlessly forward with no clear destination. Men wake up every morning knowing their sentence carries the highest punishment under California law, yet also knowing that years, sometimes decades, may pass before anything changes. This contradiction shapes everything. Death row at San Quentin operates under a different rhythm than the rest of the prison. Cells are smaller, movement is more restricted, security procedures are tighter. Most individuals spend the majority of their day inside their cells with limited opportunities for movement, programming, or social interaction. Conversations are often conducted through cell doors, across narrow walkways, or during tightly controlled moments outside the cell. Time moves differently here. There is no release date to count down to, no clear milestone that signals progress, no certainty about what tomorrow brings. For some, appeals continue for years. For others, the legal process slows to a crawl. And for many, the waiting becomes heavier than the sentence itself. Mental health professionals who study long-term incarceration often describe death row as one of the most psychologically demanding environments in the prison system, not because of constant violence, not because of chaos, but because of uncertainty. Men on death row live with three overlapping realities: the knowledge of their sentence, the possibility of legal relief, the uncertainty of when or if anything will change. This creates a mental tension that never fully resolves. Some individuals respond by withdrawing inward. Others become hyper-focused on legal work. Some build rigid daily routines to impose structure on a future that feels undefined. At San Quentin, routine is not comfort, it is survival. A typical day on death row is quiet. Meals arrive on a strict schedule. Counts are conducted multiple times a day. Movement happens under close supervision. Cells are often equipped with minimal furnishings, a bed, a small desk, a toilet, and sink unit. Limited personal items, many individuals fill their time with reading, writing letters, listening to radio broadcasts, or working on legal paperwork, for those who are allowed. Brief recreation periods offer a small change in environment, but always under watchful eyes, Detail is controlled. Every deviation is noticed, and over time. That control reshapes how people think, move, and interact. Despite the restrictions, human connection still exists, but it is fragile. Conversations happen through bars, doors, or shouted exchanges down the tier. Letters become lifelines. Visits, when approved, are heavily regulated for some incarcerated individuals. Outside contact is limited to attorneys and immediate family. Others lose contact with the outside world entirely as years pass and relationships fade. One former death row resident later described the experience as living in a room where your past is always low. Older than your future at San Quentin. Connection is not guaranteed. It must be preserved deliberately or it disappears, unlike popular portrayals. Death row is deeply tied to legal procedure. Appeals can take decades. Cases move slowly through courts. New evidence, legal arguments, or changes in law can alter outcomes long after sentencing. For some individuals, sentences are reduced. For others, convictions are overturned. And for many, the process simply continues with no resolution in sight. This legal limbo creates a strange psychological space. Hope exists, but it cannot be trusted. Optimism feels dangerous. Pessimism feels unbearable. So many learn to live somewhere in between. Correctional officers assigned to death row receive specialized training. The environment requires consistency, professionalism, and emotional control. Officers interact daily with individuals who are facing the most severe sentence possible often. For decades, many describe the work as procedural rather than emotional. Rules are followed. Precisely, boundaries are maintained. And yet, long exposure to death row changes everyone who works there, not through dramatic events, but through repetition, through silence, through time. San Quentin's death row holds more than incarcerated individuals. It holds unresolved cases. Unanswered questions, legal debates that stretch across generations. It represents one of the most complex intersections of justice, punishment, law, and human psychology in the American prison system. And while public attention often focuses on executions, inside San Quentin, death row is mostly about waiting for court decisions, waiting for letters, waiting for change, waiting for time to move forward. As years pass, the impact of this waiting becomes visible not just in legal records, but in behavior, mental health, and identity. By the time inmates reach long-term confinement at San Quentin, the prison is no longer just a place they live. It becomes the framework through which they experience reality. Nowhere is that more apparent than in the sections of the facility closest to death row. San Quentin is one of the few prisons in the United States where condemned inmates are housed in close proximity to general population units. This creates an atmosphere unlike any other correctional facility in the country for men serving standard sentences. Death row is not an abstract concept. It is audible. It is visible. And at times, it is impossible to ignore. The sounds travel through the aging structure of the prison, metal doors closing with heavy finality, the echo of restraints being secured. Footsteps moving down corridors that were never designed to soften sound, even inmates not. Sentenced to death understand exactly what part of the prison those sounds come from. It adds a constant psychological presence, one that reminds everyone inside that San Quentin holds people at every possible stage of incarceration. From short-term sentences to the final stages of life, life on death row follows a stricter, more isolated pattern than the rest of the prison. Inmates are typically confined to their cells. For most of the day, movement is limited. Interaction is controlled. Every procedure is governed by security protocols designed to minimize risk. Cells are small and functional. Personal items are limited. Meals are delivered through slots. Exercise, when permitted, occurs in enclosed spaces under constant supervision for those sentenced to death. Time takes on a different meaning. Appeals can stretch on for years, sometimes decades. Court dates come and go. Legal paperwork accumulates. But daily life inside the prison changes very little. Many inmates describe the experience not as waiting for death, but waiting without knowing what they are waiting for. San Quentin's unique structure means death row exists alongside inmates serving life sentences, long-term sentences, and in some cases, individuals preparing for eventual release. This proximity affects everyone. Some inmates report becoming hyper-aware of their own sentences after hearing the routines associated with death row. Others intentionally avoid thinking about it, focusing only on their immediate environment. Correctional officers are trained to maintain professional distance. But many acknowledge the emotional weight of working in units where executions were historically carried out even after California halted executions. The presence of death row remains a defining feature of the prison's identity. It shapes conversations, it influences inmate behavior, and it reinforces the seriousness of the institution itself. Psychologists who study long-term incarceration often note that survival inside facilities like San Quentin depends less on physical strength and more on mental adaptation. Inmates develop coping mechanisms, strict personal routines, writing letters, reading extensively, exercising in confined spaces, avoiding unnecessary conflict, limiting emotional exposure for some. Faith becomes a stabilizing force. For others, education programs or prison jobs offer a sense of purpose. But even with coping strategies, the environment exerts pressure, the age of the prison, the constant noise, the visibility of extreme sentences, the lack of privacy, all of it accumulates. San Quentin is not designed to be comfortable. It is designed to contain. And over time, containment reshapes how people think, feel, and respond to the world around them. Inside San Quentin, no one escapes the awareness of consequence. Every movement is regulated. Every interaction is observed. Every day follows a pattern shaped by security needs rather than personal choice for inmates. This means learning to exist within limitations that never fully disappear. For staff, it means maintaining control in a facility where history, reputation, and reality collide daily. And for death row inmates, it means living in a state of prolonged uncertainty defined not by a date on the calendar, but by a legal process that can stretch across a lifetime. San Quentin does not announce these realities loudly. It doesn't need to. They are built into the walls, the routines, and the silence between movements. And as the years pass, that silence becomes one of the most powerful forces inside the prison. By the time an individual has spent several years on San Quentin's death row, something fundamental changes, not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, almost invisibly. Time inside death row does not move forward in a normal way. It stretches, it folds in on itself. Days feel repetitive, yet years pass quickly when measured from the outside. Many incarcerated individuals describe a strange contradiction. Life feels both frozen and constantly slipping away, unlike other prison units. Death row operates on a different psychological timeline. There is no release date to prepare for. No countdown toward freedom. No concrete milestone that signals progress. Instead, time becomes abstract, measured not in months or years, but in routines, legal updates, and small daily markers, a court notice, a legal filing, a brief meeting with an attorney. Then long stretches of nothing, for many. This uncertainty becomes heavier than the sentence itself. Individuals housed on San Quentin's death row live with a unique form of uncertainty. While sentences are officially death sentences, the reality is far more complex. Appeals can last decades. Some individuals spend 20, 30, even 40 years in the same unit. During that time, they exist in a state of suspension. They are not preparing for release. They are not actively preparing for execution. They are waiting. That waiting shapes behavior, emotions, and identity. Some people become hyper-focused on legal details, memorizing dates, court terms, and procedural language. Others detach almost entirely, choosing to live only in the present day. Some cling to strict routines, exercise at the same hour, reading at the same time. Sleeping at the same moment every night, routine becomes a survival tool. In a place where the future is uncertain and the past cannot be changed, structure offers a sense of control. Daily life on death row is deliberately predictable. Meals arrive at the same times. Counts occur on schedule, movement is limited and controlled, while the structure exists for safety and security. It also becomes a psychological anchor. Many individuals create deeply personal routines. Walking the length of the cell a specific number of times, reading the same type of material every day, writing letters on set days of the week, exercising in strict patterns, keeping detailed journals or logs. These behaviors are not acts of rebellion or defiance. They are acts of preservation. Psychologists who study long-term confinement often note that predictability helps individuals maintain emotional stability in environments with limited stimulation. When external choices are restricted, internal structure becomes essential at San Quentin. That internal structure often determines whether someone adapts or deteriorates. Over time, many individuals on death row develop emotional distance as a coping mechanism. This does not mean they stop feeling. Instead, emotions become controlled, muted, or carefully managed. Hope is not eliminated, but it is redefined. Hope becomes smaller, more contained, focused on immediate, reachable moments, a calm day, a letter received, a conversation that goes well, a book finished. Large hopes, freedom, vindication, resolution are often set aside because they carry too much emotional risk. This emotional adjustment is not weakness, it is adaptation. In environments where emotional extremes can be destabilizing, moderation becomes survival. San Quentin maintains mental health services specifically for individuals in long-term restrictive housing, including death row. Mental health professionals conduct regular evaluations, monitor behavior, and intervene when necessary. These interactions are structured and clinical. They are not therapy sessions in the traditional sense. They are assessments focused on stability and safety. Individuals are often asked about sleep, appetite, stress levels, and mood changes. Some engage openly, others provide minimal responses. Many learn how to communicate just enough to avoid unwanted changes in classification. This dynamic creates a careful balance. Mental health staff aim to identify warning signs early. Incarcerated individuals aim to maintain autonomy and routine. Both sides operate within a system built on control, caution, and limited trust. For people who have spent decades on San Quentin's death row, identity evolves in ways that are difficult to understand from the outside. Some individuals become deeply reflective. Some become educators or mentors within allowed boundaries. Some withdraw, inward, living quietly and deliberately. Their lives do not resemble freedom, but they are lives nonetheless. They read, they think, they remember, they adapt. San Quentin's death row is not defined solely by punishment. It is defined by endurance, by the ability of human beings to continue existing within strict, unchanging boundaries. And as the years pass, one truth becomes unavoidable. The sentence does not only shape time. Time reshapes the person living inside it. As debates continue around capital punishment, appeals, and long-term confinement, the individuals inside San Quentin remain where they have always been, living day to day within a system larger than any single case. By the time an individual leaves San Quentin, whether through release, transfer, or sentence completion, the prison does not simply stay behind, it follows them. San Quentin is not just a physical place, it is a conditioning environment. For people who spent years inside its walls, especially those who lived on death row or in long-term restrictive housing, the outside world can feel unfamiliar, overwhelming, and unpredictable. Former residents often describe the same quiet shock. The noise is louder than they remember. Crowds feel intrusive. Simple choices: where to go, what to eat, how to move, become unexpectedly stressful. Inside San Quentin, life is governed by routine. When to wake, when to eat, when to move, when to stop. Outside, there are no bells, no counts, no orders. Freedom does not arrive as relief. It arrives as uncertainty. Some individuals struggle with basic interactions. Eye contact feels Intense conversations move to quickly silence once present. Becomes something they unconsciously seek. Mental health professionals describe this as institutional adaptation, not a weakness, but a learned response to years of rigid structure and constant awareness. Families feel the impact, too. Parents meet children who grew up without them. Partners reconnect with someone shaped by years of separation. Loved ones often say the same thing. They came home, but not the same. Reentry programs try to bridge that gap, offering counseling, transitional housing, and job assistance. But the process is rarely smooth. The habits learned inside San Quentin hyper-awareness. Emotional restraint, guarded trust do not disappear overnight, and for some, they never fully fade outside the prison gates. San Quentin occupies a unique place in American culture. It has been the subject of books, documentaries, news headlines, and public debate for decades. To some, it represents accountability proof that serious crimes carry serious consequences. To others, it represents unresolved questions about punishment, about rehabilitation, about how long a human being should live under extreme conditions. San Quentin is often discussed, argued over, and symbolized. But inside the prison, away from the headlines, daily life remains procedural. Doors open, doors close, counts are taken, meals are delivered, time moves forward, not dramatically, not emotionally, but steadily. The prison does not explain itself. It does not justify itself. It simply operates. Over the years, San Quentin has undergone changes. Death row policies have shifted, programs have expanded. Educational and rehabilitative efforts have increased, yet the core reality remains. San Quentin houses individuals convicted of some of the most serious crimes in California's history. Security will always be central, control will always be necessary, and the tension between safety and humanity will never fully disappear. Correctional officers, healthcare workers, counselors, and administrators continue working within that balance, maintaining order while navigating the human cost of long-term incarceration. It is not a system of simple answers. It is a system of trade-offs. As San Quentin moves forward under scrutiny, reform efforts, and ongoing debate, one truth remains clear. The prison does not end at the gates. It continues in memories, in habits, in families, in communities, and in the lives of those who pass through it. San Quentin State Prison does not end at the gates. For the men who pass through it, whether they leave through transfer, release, or execution, the prison continues long after the concrete walls disappear from view, because San Quentin doesn't just confine bodies, it reshapes minds. For individuals who leave San Quentin after long periods of incarceration, especially those housed in highly restrictive units, the outside world often feels unfamiliar. Simple things become complicated, standing in open spaces hearing multiple conversations at once, making decisions without instructions, sleeping without constant background noise. Being around crowds without scanning for threats. Former inmates often describe a strange contradiction. They longed for freedom for years, but once they had it, they didn't know how to move inside it. The world felt louder, faster, less predictable inside. San Quentin, every movement is controlled. Outside, nothing is. That shift can be overwhelming. Families experience their own version of San Quentin. Years of visiting rooms, short conversations across tables, phone calls monitored and timed, letters read and delayed. Children grow older. Parents age, relationships change when someone returns home after decades inside. Families often describe the same challenge. You get them back, but not exactly how you remember them. The person is present but quieter, more cautious, less expressive. San Quentin does not pause time. It stretches it. Correctional officers and staff are shaped too. Many describe the prison as a place where alertness never fully turns off, where silence feels unnatural, where routine follows them home. Some leave after a few years. Others spend entire careers inside its walls. Almost all agree on one thing. San Quentin demands precision. Emotion has no place on the tier. Consistency keeps people alive, and that weight doesn't always stay behind when the shift ends. From the state's point of view, San Quentin serves a clear purpose. It houses individuals convicted of the most serious crimes. it contains security risks. It enforces sentences handed down by the courts. Officials argue that structure, control, and predictability are necessary to prevent violence and maintain order. And historically, San Quentin exists because society demanded a place like it. But necessity does not erase consequence. San Quentin remains at the center of national and global conversations about incarceration. Questions continue to surface. Can punishment and rehabilitation coexist? How long should extreme confinement last? What responsibility does society have after release? Does isolation protect the public or create new harm? There are no simple answers. Only perspectives shaped by experience, loss, fear, and responsibility. San Quentin is more than California's oldest prison. It is a mirror, a reflection of how a society responds to violence, how it defines justice, how it balances safety with humanity. Every cell, every echoing corridor, every name on the roster, they all become part of a larger story, one that continues whether we look away or not. On the edge of San Francisco Bay stands a prison older than the state itself, a place built to contain the most serious crimes, and the people behind them. San Quentin is not just a prison. It is a symbol, a boundary between justice and consequence inside its walls. Time moves differently, silence carries weight, and routine becomes survival. But beyond the gates are our lives forever shaped by what happened inside, the incarcerated, the families, the staff, and the communities left waiting. San Quentin does not offer simple answers. It leaves us with questions about punishment, responsibility, and who we become through the systems we build. And that is the real story of San Quentin. If this story helped you understand what life is really like inside America's most notorious detention centers, consider subscribing to the channel. New long-form crime documentaries are released regularly, each one carefully researched, responsibly told, and focused on the realities behind the headlines. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Thank you for watching.